The phrase New World Order has carried emotional weight for decades, but in 2026 it feels more charged than ever. It appears in podcasts, political speeches, social media threads, and late-night debates. For some, it represents a coordinated plan by powerful elites to reshape humanity under centralized control. For others, it simply describes a changing global system adjusting to new realities. The tension between those two interpretations reveals something deeper than the phrase itself. It reflects uncertainty, distrust, rapid technological transformation, and a shifting balance of power across the globe. To understand what people mean when they talk about a hidden agenda behind a new world order, we must examine history, geopolitics, economics, technology, and psychology with patience rather than fear. The term itself is not new. After major global conflicts, leaders have often described emerging political arrangements as a new order. Following World War I and again after World War II, diplomats spoke of constructing frameworks to prevent further catastrophic wars. After the Cold War ended, President George H.W. Bush publicly used the phrase to describe hopes for a more cooperative international system. At that time, the meaning was not secretive. It was diplomatic language referring to a restructured global balance after the collapse of the Soviet Union. However, as decades passed and global institutions gained more influence, the phrase took on a darker tone in public imagination. In 2026, the world is undergoing significant transformation. The era of clear unipolar dominance has faded. Power is now distributed among multiple major actors: the United States, China, the European Union, Russia, India, and regional powers in the Middle East and Africa. This multipolar environment is inherently unstable because no single authority sets uncontested rules. Instead, norms are negotiated, challenged, and revised. Trade systems are reconfigured. Defense alliances are reassessed. Technological standards are contested. When the structure of global authority shifts, people often interpret the transition as deliberate orchestration rather than organic evolution. One of the strongest drivers behind New World Order suspicions is economic globalization. Over the past 3 decades, multinational corporations have expanded beyond national boundaries. Supply chains stretch across continents. Financial markets operate around the clock, connecting investors in New York, London, Tokyo, and Dubai in milliseconds. Decisions made in one capital can ripple across economies thousands of miles away. For individuals experiencing economic insecurity, this interconnectedness can feel like loss of control. When factories close due to global competition or inflation rises because of distant conflicts, people search for explanations. The idea of hidden coordination among financial elites offers a simple narrative for complex systemic forces. International financial institutions also contribute to perceptions of centralized influence. Organizations such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank impose policy conditions on countries receiving financial assistance. These conditions often promote fiscal discipline, regulatory reforms, or structural adjustments. Critics argue that such measures favor certain economic ideologies and reduce national policy autonomy. Supporters respond that coordinated financial governance prevents systemic collapse. Regardless of one's position, the visibility of supranational influence fuels suspicion that national sovereignty is eroding under an invisible hand. Technology in 2026 intensifies these concerns dramatically. Artificial intelligence systems shape decision-making in finance, healthcare, security, and media. Cloud infrastructure is controlled by a small number of technology giants. Social media algorithms influence political discourse and public opinion. Data has become a strategic asset. When a handful of corporations possess unprecedented access to behavioral information and computational power, it raises legitimate questions about accountability and influence. However, concentrated corporate power differs from a unified secret agenda. Corporations compete with each other aggressively. Governments regulate, negotiate, and sometimes confront them. Influence exists, but it is fragmented and contested. Digital currencies and financial innovation further complicate the landscape. Several central banks have piloted or implemented digital currency systems to modernize payments and reduce transaction friction. Some observers fear that programmable digital money could enable excessive state control over economic activity. Others argue that such systems increase efficiency and financial inclusion. The debate reflects broader tension between innovation and privacy. While vigilance is warranted in protecting civil liberties, technological modernization does not automatically prove the existence of a coordinated global takeover. Another factor driving hidden agenda narratives is crisis convergence. The early 2020s witnessed a global pandemic, supply chain disruptions, regional wars, energy price shocks, and accelerating climate emergencies. When governments across continents implemented similar policies, such as travel restrictions or emergency stimulus measures, critics interpreted the coordination as evidence of prearranged planning. In reality, crises often produce convergent responses because governments face similar constraints and expert recommendations. Shared action does not necessarily imply shared conspiracy. It often reflects shared vulnerability. Climate policy illustrates this tension clearly. International agreements encourage emissions reduction targets and coordinated transitions toward renewable energy. For industries dependent on fossil fuels, these policies can feel like externally imposed restructuring. For environmental advocates, they represent necessary global cooperation to address a borderless problem. The negotiation process is visible and contentious. Countries debate timelines, financing, and fairness. If a secret unified agenda existed, such negotiations would likely appear more harmonious. Instead, they are often contentious and slow. Geopolitical rivalry in 2026 undermines the idea of a single hidden authority. The United States and China compete over technological supremacy, semiconductor supply chains, and military influence in the Indo-Pacific. Russia's confrontation with Western alliances has reshaped European security architecture. Regional powers pursue independent strategies. Economic sanctions and counter-sanctions fragment global trade patterns. If a cohesive elite coalition were orchestrating world events seamlessly, these visible rivalries would appear inconsistent with that theory. Yet distrust persists, and it deserves analysis rather than dismissal. Public confidence in institutions has declined in many countries. Corruption scandals, misinformation campaigns, and perceived inequality erode legitimacy. When trust erodes, suspicion fills the vacuum. Conspiracy narratives thrive in environments where citizens feel excluded from decision-making. The problem may not be hidden coordination, but insufficient transparency and accountability. Media ecosystems amplify dramatic interpretations. Algorithms prioritize emotionally charged content. Claims of secret plans generate more engagement than nuanced policy analysis. In a digital attention economy, sensational explanations spread faster than complex ones. As a result, narratives of hidden agendas gain traction regardless of empirical support. This does not mean all concerns are baseless, but it underscores how perception can diverge from structural reality. Economic inequality remains a powerful emotional driver. Wealth concentration among billionaires and multinational corporations is visible and measurable. When ordinary people struggle with housing costs, healthcare expenses, or job displacement due to automation, they interpret elite wealth accumulation as deliberate exploitation. While inequality results from multiple interacting forces, tax policy, technological change, globalization, capital mobility, it is easier psychologically to attribute hardship to coordinated malice than to systemic complexity. Surveillance technology adds another layer of anxiety. Governments use facial recognition, predictive analytics, and data aggregation tools to enhance security. Corporations collect consumer data to refine advertising and services. In authoritarian contexts, surveillance can suppress dissent. In democratic contexts, oversight mechanisms exist but may lag behind technological capability. The risk of misuse is real, yet surveillance expansion arises from security incentives and commercial profit motives rather than necessarily from a singular hidden master plan. Security alliances and intelligence cooperation also feed perceptions. Countries share information on terrorism, cyber threats, and organized crime. Joint military exercises occur across continents. These cooperative networks appear extensive. However, they are built through treaties, bilateral agreements, and mutual interest calculations. They are neither secret nor uniform. States frequently disagree even within alliances, demonstrating that cooperation does not equal centralized command. The rise of artificial intelligence governance discussions in 2026 further fuels speculation. Governments debate regulatory standards for AI safety, ethical deployment, and military applications. International bodies propose guidelines. Some fear that centralized regulation could stifle innovation or enable control. Others worry about unchecked development leading to instability. The debate reflects competing interests rather than hidden consensus. Energy transitions continue reshaping geopolitical priorities. As countries invest in renewable infrastructure, competition over rare earth minerals and battery supply chains intensifies. Nations form new trade partnerships. Traditional oil exporting states diversify economies. This restructuring can resemble deliberate global redesign, yet it emerges from environmental pressures, technological feasibility, and market dynamics. Psychologically, the concept of a hidden agenda satisfies a desire for clarity. Complex systems are uncomfortable. They produce unpredictable outcomes. Conspiracy frameworks provide narrative simplicity. They assign agency and intention where randomness and structural forces dominate. This does not invalidate skepticism but highlights cognitive tendencies. Transparency deficits contribute to suspicion. International negotiations often occur behind closed doors before public announcement. Trade agreements are drafted through technical processes inaccessible to ordinary citizens. Lack of accessible explanation invites speculation. Governments that fail to communicate clearly inadvertently strengthen alternative narratives. It is also important to recognize that elites do coordinate within limited spheres. Business leaders attend global forums. Policymakers exchange ideas at international summits. Academic and corporate networks overlap. Shared education and professional backgrounds can produce similar worldviews. However, similarity does not equal centralized conspiracy. Coordination occurs around specific issues with diverging interests. In 2026, the international system appears fragmented rather than unified. Competing digital standards, diverging regulatory models, and geopolitical rivalries contradict the image of seamless elite consensus. Economic blocs pursue distinct strategies. Sanctions regimes fragment trade. Currency competition intensifies. These patterns suggest contestation rather than uniform direction. The hidden agenda narrative often assumes long-term master planning. Yet political leadership changes frequently. Elections shift policy direction. Revolutions overturn governments. Economic crises alter priorities. Long-term coherence across such variability would require extraordinary secrecy and discipline rarely observed in political history. That said, power asymmetry remains real. Corporations influence legislation. Wealth shapes political access. Lobbying affects regulatory outcomes. Addressing these realities requires institutional reform and civic engagement rather than assumption of omnipotent conspiracy. Democratic accountability mechanisms exist, though imperfectly implemented. The deeper issue behind New World Order fears may be the erosion of perceived agency. When individuals feel their voices carry little impact, they attribute decisions to distant forces. Restoring trust requires transparency, education, and participation. Ultimately, the global order in 2026 is evolving through competition, crisis response, technological change, and negotiation. Institutions adapt imperfectly. Alliances shift. Economic structures reorganize. These dynamics can resemble coordinated redesign, but they arise from intersecting interests rather than a single hidden script. In conclusion, the idea of a hidden agenda behind a new world order reflects genuine anxieties about power concentration, surveillance, inequality, and rapid transformation. However, evidence points toward a fragmented multipolar system marked by rivalry and negotiation rather than unified secret control. Vigilance in protecting rights and demanding accountability remains essential. Critical thinking requires examining structures without surrendering to unfounded certainty. The world is changing undeniably, but change does not automatically imply concealed orchestration.